Hello to all the curious minds out there, and welcome back. Imagine for a second that you live in a world where your deepest beliefs and the most advanced science seem to say opposite things. That tension isn't a modern phenomenon. It's a conflict that has torn at the human intellect for centuries. Today we dive into the mind of a giant who dared to build a bridge over that abyss. We are talking about Moses Maimonides, a man who was a rabbi, a physician to sultans, and a philosopher. A thinker who refused to choose between the faith of his fathers and the logic of Aristotle. His masterpiece is titled The Guide for the Perplexed, and the title is incredibly fitting. It was written for those who, while studying philosophy, felt their faith beginning to waver. Maimonides told them they had nothing to fear. That truth cannot contradict truth. But the path to reconciling these two forces was not easy. It cost him exile, persecution, and seeing his books burned by his own peers. However, his intellectual light eventually illuminated not only Judaism, but also Christianity and Western thought. How did he manage to prove that God has no body? Why did he say we can only know what God is not? And above all, what does he have to say to us today about the relationship between science and religion? Get ready, because we are going to deconstruct the thought of the eagle of the synagogue. Before we begin, a brief note. To bring this narration to life, I've used artificial intelligence tools to generate the images you see. Think of them as a canvas, a way to illustrate the ideas and the atmosphere of the story. They won't always be a literal representation, but rather a visual accompaniment to let your imagination soar with me. I truly hope you enjoy it. To understand the magnitude of his work, we first need to place ourselves in time and space. We are in the 12th century, an era many mistakenly call dark, but which in the Mediterranean world shone with a blinding intellectual light. Maimonides was born in Cordoba in the year 1138. Cordoba was then the jewel of Al-Andalus, a place where Muslims, Jews, and Christians lived side by side, where libraries were more important than armories. The young Moses grew up breathing the Torah in the morning, and Greek philosophy translated into Arabic in the afternoon. However, the peace didn't last. The invasion of the Almohads, a fundamentalist Muslim sect, forced his family to choose between forced conversion, death, or exile. Maimonides, still just a teenager, began a long pilgrimage that would mark his character forever. They traveled through North Africa, sometimes living in hiding, concealing their faith to survive. Imagine the psychological pressure. Having to pretend to be what you're not, while in your mind you're building cathedrals of logical thought. That tension between the internal and the external forged his intellect. Finally, they settled in Fostat, near Cairo, in Egypt. There, tragedy struck again. His brother David, a merchant who supported the family so Moses could study, died in a shipwreck in the Indian Ocean. Maimonides was left devastated and bedridden for 1 year. Upon recovering, he had to take on the role of provider. He didn't want to charge for teaching the Torah, so he turned to medicine. His fame grew so much that he became the personal physician to the great Saladin and his court. He spent his days healing bodies and his nights healing perplexed souls. It was during these sleepless nights, stolen from rest, that he wrote his masterpieces. Maimonides didn't write for academic vanity. He wrote out of urgent necessity. He saw that the Judaism of his time was becoming fragmented or superstitious, drifting away from reason. His intellectual project had two massive pillars. The first was codifying all of Jewish law in a work called the Mishneh Torah, a monumental job of order and clarity. But the second pillar, the one that interests us today, was his answer to the philosophical challenge, the Guide for the Perplexed. Who were these perplexed individuals? They were brilliant students. People who had read Aristotle, who understood logic, physics, and metaphysics. But when they opened the Bible, they found stories that seemed to contradict that science. They felt torn apart. The core problem was this: Greek philosophy, The science of the day said that God must be perfect, immutable, and entirely spiritual. But the Bible described a God who gets angry, who has hands, who walks through the Garden of Eden, and who changes his mind. If you accepted the science, the Bible looked like a children's story full of errors. If you accepted the Bible literally, you had to renounce your intellect and believe in a God who seemed like a giant human with superpowers. Maimonides refused to accept that dichotomy. To Maimonides, reason is a divine gift. Using your brain isn't an act of rebellion against God, but the highest form of worship. If the Bible and reason seem to clash, it's because we are reading the Bible wrong or we are reasoning poorly. There is no other option. Thus begins the guide. It's written as a letter to a beloved disciple, Joseph ben Judah. Maimonides tells him, don't be frightened by the metaphors. The first step to curing your perplexity is understanding the language. We must cleanse our minds of childish literality. Maimonides fiercely attacks the idea of anthropomorphism, the idea that God has a human form. To him, this isn't just an error, it's idolatry. If you believe God has a body, you aren't worshiping the creator of the universe. You're worshiping a creature of your imagination. He explains that when the Bible mentions the hand of God, it refers to his power. When it says the eyes of God, it refers to his providence or knowledge. The Torah speaks in the language of men, Maimonides says. It uses physical imagery so the limited human mind can grasp abstract concepts. Think of it like this. If you're explaining quantum physics to a 5-year-old, you don't use equations. You use toys and stories. The Bible does the same with humanity. But Maimonides insists that we cannot remain children forever. We must mature intellectually. Once we clear away the physical imagery, we reach the deepest problem. What can we actually say about God? Here, Maimonides introduces his most radical and fascinating concept, negative theology. Get ready, because this challenges our usual way of thinking. Normally we say, God is good, God is wise, God is powerful. Maimonides stops us in our tracks. He says that's dangerous. Why? Because when we say good, we think of human goodness. And God's goodness has nothing to do with ours. If we apply human attributes to God, we are limiting him. We are defining him. And God, by definition, is infinite and indefinable. Any positive adjective we use is, at best, a misleading metaphor, and at worst, a subtle heresy. So, do we just stay silent? No. Maimonides proposes the via negativa. We can only describe God by saying what he is not. We cannot say God is wise, but we can say with certainty that God is not ignorant. It sounds like a word game, but it's a crucial distinction. By denying ignorance, we affirm a perfection that is beyond our understanding of wisdom. By denying weakness, we point toward a power we cannot imagine. Maimonides compares this to carving a statue. You don't add material, you remove what is extra to reveal the truth. The more attributes we deny, the closer we get to the true knowledge of God. It's an intellectual ascent through elimination. It's like saying he is not matter, he is not time, he is not space, he does not change, he does not die. What remains in that conceptual silence is the closest we can get to the divine. This idea had a massive impact. It deeply influenced St. Thomas Aquinas and the mystic Meister Eckhart. The idea that God is found in the cloud of unknowing, it's a radical intellectual humility, recognizing that our words are too small for ultimate reality. But Maimonides didn't stop there. He had to face the final boss of medieval philosophy, Aristotle, and the eternity of the world. Aristotle argued that the universe had always existed. The Bible says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." Here, the clash was head-on. If the world is eternal, there was no creation. If there was no creation, the Bible is lying. Maimonides analyzes Aristotle's arguments with surgical precision, and he reaches a surprising conclusion. Aristotle did not prove the eternity of the world. Maimonides says that Aristotle only proved that eternity is possible, not that it is a fact. And creation is also possible. Since reason cannot definitively decide between one or the other, Maimonides chooses creation out of blind faith? Not exactly. He chooses creation because it better explains certain aspects of reality and because it's fundamental to moral law. If the world were eternal and necessary, everything would be determined. There would be no room for divine will or miracles. Creation implies an act of free will. This brings us to another fascinating point: miracles. For a man of science like him, miracles were a problem. How can God break his own natural laws? Maimonides offers an elegant solution. Miracles are not ruptures of natural law. He suggests that God programmed miracles into nature from the very beginning of creation, like a hidden code that activates at the precise moment. Thus, the Red Sea didn't part because of a sudden whim, but because it was written into the very structure of the water from the origin. In this way, Maimonides saves both the consistency of nature and the will of God. Everything is part of a supreme rational design. Nothing is arbitrary. And this leads us to the third part of his thought: the rationality of the law, the commandments. In his time, many said the commandments of the Torah had no reason behind them, that they were just decrees of the king we should obey without questioning. Maimonides vehemently rejected this. If God is rational, his laws must have a rational and useful purpose. He dedicated himself to finding the why behind every rule. Why not eat pork? Hygiene and health? Why the Sabbath rest? To eliminate fatigue and remind us that we aren't slaves to work. Why animal sacrifices? Here his analysis is anthropological and brilliant. Maimonides argues that in ancient times, all peoples worshipped through sacrifices. If God had forbidden sacrifices all at once, the Israelites wouldn't have been able to accept it. It would be like asking us today to stop using technology from one day to the next. So God permitted sacrifices, but restricted them to one place and under strict rules, to gradually wean them off the practice and guide them toward prayer and study. Maimonides sees the law as a pedagogical tool to elevate humanity. The ultimate goal of all this law and philosophy isn't just obedience. It's human perfection. For Maimonides, true piety requires knowledge. You cannot love God if you don't know him. And to know him, you must study his work. Nature, physics, astronomy. This was revolutionary. Studying science becomes a religious mandate. The more you understand the complexity of a cell or the vastness of a galaxy, the greater your wonder and your love for the Creator. Ignorance is not piety. Ignorance is a barrier. Maimonides describes 4 levels of perfection. The first is the possession of material goods, the lowest. The second is the perfection of the body, health and strength. The third is moral perfection, being a good person. But the fourth and highest is intellectual perfection. To him, ethics is just a preliminary step. You need to be good and control your passions to have the calm necessary to study. But the ultimate end is the intellectual contemplation of truth. That is where the human being connects with the divine. This elitist and intellectual vision didn't sit well with everyone. During his life and after his death, Maimonides was a polarizing figure. Traditionalists saw him as a dangerous innovator who was Hellenizing the faith. They felt he was selling the Jewish heritage to the Greeks. The controversy reached such a point that in the 13th century, rabbis in France banned the study of the Guide for the Perplexed, and in a tragic twist of irony, denounced the book to the Dominican Inquisition. Maimonides' books were burned in the public square of Montpellier. It is said that when years later the Talmud was burned in the same spot, some saw it as divine punishment for having burned the works of Maimonides. Over time, history proved him right. His critics were forgotten or sidelined, but he prevailed. His influence crossed the borders of his religion. Thomas Aquinas, the giant of Catholic theology, cites him frequently as Rabbi Moses. The synthesis Maimonides created served as a model for Aquinas to do the same with Christianity. Centuries later, a young excommunicated Jew in Amsterdam, Baruch Spinoza, would read Maimonides. Although Spinoza would criticize and move beyond Maimonides, the seed of critical analysis of the Bible and the search for a rational religion was there, in the Guide. Maimonides left us a legacy of intellectual courage. He taught us that we shouldn't compartmentalize our minds. You can't be a scientist from Monday to Friday and a believer on the weekend. You must integrate your world. Truth is one. Today, in a world where we're often asked to choose between facts and values, between technology and spirituality, Maimonides' voice resonates with power. He reminds us that a faith that fears reason is a weak faith, and that a reason that ignores the transcendent can become blind. His tomb in Tiberias bears a famous inscription, "From Moses to Moses, there arose none like Moses," comparing him to the biblical prophet. And it's because Maimonides didn't just interpret the law. He redefined what it means to be a person of faith in a complex world. He taught us to live in perplexity without despairing. To understand that doubt is not the enemy of faith, but the fuel of the search. If you are perplexed, he said, it's because you're about to learn something new. Confusion is the labor pain of understanding. In the end, The Guide for the Perplexed is not a book of easy answers. It's training. Maimonides doesn't want to tell you what to think. He wants to teach you how to think. He wants you to climb the ladder yourself, step by step, until you reach your own vision of the truth. So the next time you feel your ideas clashing, or that you don't have all the answers, remember the doctor from Cordoba. Remember that the honest search for truth is in itself a sacred act. Don't fear the difficult questions. Let's take a moment to look at his impact on medicine, because it's another facet of his rationalism. Maimonides rejected the spells and amulets common in medieval medicine. For him, the body was a natural machine that should be treated with diet, exercise, and emotional balance. He wrote treatises on asthma, poisons, and their antidotes, and even on healthy living. His approach was holistic. He said the doctor should not treat the disease, but the patient. Anxiety and sadness, he claimed, weaken the body as much as a virus. This psychosomatic vision was centuries ahead of its time. Maimonides understood that mind and body are a unit. You cannot have an elevated soul in a broken body, nor a healthy body with a tortured mind. It's all part of the same system created by God. Returning to philosophy, it's crucial to understand his concept of prophecy. For Maimonides, a prophet isn't just someone God speaks to magically. It's someone who has perfected both their intellect and their imagination so much that they can tune in to divine truth. It's a mix of natural genius and discipline. Prophecy is an overflow of the intellect. God emanates truth, and the prophet is the antenna capable of catching it. This democratizes spirituality in a way. It requires human effort, not just arbitrary divine choice. However, Maimonides clarifies that even if you prepare yourself, God can block prophecy if he so wishes. He maintains divine sovereignty, but puts the responsibility for growth on the human being. It's a delicate balance between merit and grace. Let's talk about his writing style in the Guide. Maimonides admits he wrote the book with deliberate contradictions. Why would he do that? To hide the deepest truths from common people who might misinterpret them and lose their faith. It's an esoteric method, like a puzzle. Only the diligent student who reads chapter 1 and connects it with chapter 50 will find the key. Maimonides wanted active readers, not passive ones. He wanted you to wrestle with the text. This has generated centuries of academic debate. What was Maimonides' true opinion? Was he a traditional believer using philosophy to defend the faith? Or was he a radical philosopher using religion to calm the masses? The likely answer is both. He was a man of deep faith who believed that philosophical truth was the essence of the Torah. He didn't see two truths, but a single truth expressed in two ways. One for the intellectual elite, and another, narrative and legal, for the general community. This elitism is perhaps the hardest part to stomach today, but we must understand it in its context. Maimonides believed metaphysical truths were dangerous if one wasn't prepared, like giving a scalpel to a child. Caution was an act of responsibility. Despite this, his codification of law, the Mishneh Torah, was written in simple Hebrew, so everyone, from the farmer to the scholar, could know what to do. Here we see his pastoral side. He wanted to make Jewish life easier, not more complicated. Imagine the discipline of this man. Physician by day, community leader, judge, writer by night. His letter describing his daily routine is exhausting just to read. He saw patients until he collapsed, and yet still found the strength to write immortal works. Maimonides teaches us about time management and purpose. He didn't waste a moment. Everything was directed toward a greater end, the service of God and humanity through intellect and action. A life that was integrated and coherent. In the 21st century, where information floods us but wisdom is scarce, Maimonides is a beacon. He asks us to filter, to analyze, and not to accept dogmas, religious or secular, without passing them through the sieve of critical reason. He warns us against fanaticism. Fanaticism is born from a literal and superficial reading. The cure for extremism, according to Maimonides, is philosophy. It's understanding the nuances, the metaphors, and the depth of texts and reality. His vision of the Messianic era is also rationalist. He didn't expect cosmic miracles. He said the Messianic era would be a time of political peace and freedom, allowing humans to dedicate themselves to wisdom without war or hunger, a humanist and achievable ideal. At the end of his days, Maimonides was exhausted but satisfied. He had built a system that would outlast empires. He had given the perplexed a guide, not a detailed map, but a compass. And that compass still points north 8 centuries later. His legacy is proof that tradition and innovation are not enemies. That one can be deeply faithful to their roots, and at the same time radically open to the truth wherever it comes from. Accept the truth from whoever says it was his motto. Maimonides took Aristotle, a pagan, and used him to understand the Bible. That's courage. He invites us not to fear external wisdom. If it is true, it is of God, regardless of whether a Greek, an Arab, or a Jew discovered it. And so we close this journey through the mind of Maimonides, from the streets of Cordoba to the court of Egypt, from perplexity to clarity, a journey that challenges us to be better thinkers and better believers, or simply better human beings. I hope this analysis has sparked something in you. I hope it has made you want to open those old books and see what they have to tell us. Because human problems don't change that much, and the answers of the sages are still waiting. What part of Maimonides' thought resonated with you most? Negative theology? The idea that miracles are natural? Or his insistence on reason? I would love to read your reflections in the comments. This channel thrives on your ideas. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive. In a world of fast and superficial content, your time and attention are the most valuable gift. Thank you for choosing to think, for choosing to question, and for choosing to learn. If this content brought you value, consider subscribing and sharing it with other perplexed souls looking for a guide. I'll see you in the next intellectual adventure. Until then, keep that curiosity alive.